So with the Pope Francis's death, it will now be up to 138 cardinals to elect the next leader of the Catholic Church. During one of the most secretive elections in the world, a conclave. In his tenure, Pope Francis charted a new course for the papacy, championing the plight of immigrants, the marginalized, and clashing with many of the traditionalists known to be allied with his predecessor, Benedict XVI. Joining us now to talk more about the future of the church, Deborah Lobov, MSNBC Vatican analyst. Deborah, Pope Francis was elected by cardinals who wanted a reformer in the Vatican. Now, 12 years later, do you think church leaders want the next pope to continue in that mold, or are they more likely to return to the more traditionalist approach?
I think they wanted a reformer, and they did have that with Pope Francis, even if he didn't change church teaching, but he did cause a lot of reform within the church. But I think, according to some more conservative Catholics or cardinals, they may have felt he went a step too far. So at this point, we're probably looking at the pendulum shifting a little more central than one would have expected, because even though it was certainly seen as refreshing, everything that Pope Francis has done through the pontificate, some observed there was a little bit of a lack of unity among conservative and progressive Catholics. So I think the Pope, looking forward for the future of the Catholic Church, will be someone who manages to sort of bridge that gap and pull everyone closer together.
I mean, one of the things we've talked about here is that Pope Francis was one of the first non-European popes elected, the first in over 1,000 years. And in his time as Pope, he has selected or appointed many cardinals, and they too have come from other parts outside of Europe. And so the majority of the 138 cardinals are now non-European, and they will be among those who choose the next pope. How much do you think that selection that he's made has already shaped the direction of the church?
Well, Pope Francis, who has been frequently referred to as the Pope of the Peripheries, has made historic appointments from countries and islands that people hadn't even heard of. And certainly that has increased the representation, especially in Asia, in Africa, et cetera. So certainly that will play a role. The thing is that there's not really a clear candidate per se. And given that Pope Francis's pontificate, to the delight of many, has lasted a whole 12 years, and he was able to preside over the opening of the Jubilee year, et cetera, many of those who were seen as possible future popes at this point may have already turned 80, and therefore it would be very unlikely that they would be considered nominees. But it's definitely going to play a role. But I think at the end of the day, at these general congregation meetings that'll be taking place in the Vatican starting tomorrow morning among the College of Cardinals members, what is said at those meetings will play a very big role, and they'll be looking to who inspires them in a particular way.
Deborah, stay with us. Let's bring in Christopher White, Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Reporter. And Christopher, you wrote for National Catholic Reporter that the church is at a crossroads, and Francis's death brings to a halt a period of rapid change in the Vatican, where women ascended into new ranks within the hierarchy, where concern for migrants and climate change superseded issues of gender and sexuality, and where the church engaged all of its members. What issues could the next pope champion in the way that Francis championed care for the stranger and the earth?
Well, I think this conclave will be a referendum on the Francis papacy. And the cardinals, once they get inside the Sistine Chapel, will have to decide if they want to continue on this path of reform and on this path of opening the church up to the modern world that Francis began to pioneer. That will be the job of 135 cardinal electors in a few weeks from now. But I suspect because Pope Francis has named 4/5 of the people that will be in that room to elect a successor, they will more likely share his priorities than not.
The next election of Pope won't happen for a few weeks, as you mentioned, but are there any in particular who might be candidates that we should keep our eyes on?
I think it's important to remember that when the cardinals arrive here in Rome, they will have a series of closed-door meetings where they'll talk about the needs of the church and what the papacy needs in this moment. And I think they'll come up with sort of a profile of what they're looking for before they start talking about particular people. So there are certain candidates that are always talked about, of course, but I think in this conclave in particular, we have to leave a lot of room for an element of surprise.
All right, Christopher White and Deborah Lvov, thank you both for your insights.